Hundreds of SaberSim users took down MLB DFS tournaments in 2024, and our Sims are back and better than ever for the 2025 season. My name's Jordan Chand, I'm SaberSim's head coach, and in this video, I'll give you everything you need to know to land in our winner's circle this season. In this video, I'll give you the right mindset it takes to beat MLB DFS, show you what a strong contest portfolio looks like on any given slate, walk through the process of how to build winning lineups. And in the next video, I'll show you how to react to breaking news and late swap, and finally, how to review your process using our contest flashback to make sure you're on the right track. When it comes to building a strong MLB DFS process, the number one thing to keep in mind when you're using a tool like SaberSim is to keep it simple. A lot of people think that more complexity in their process means more profit, but you don't want to do things just to do things. On typical optimizers, you have to do a lot. Typical optimizers only understand average projection, and there's way more that goes into beating MLB DFS than that. We have stacking, we have ownership, we have upside for players that doesn't always align with their projection. So you have to load up an optimizer with tons of rules and groups and exposures and all these different settings to get it to go from optimizing by average projection to optimizing for upside. That's not the case with SaberSim. We're using play-by-play game simulations of every game on the slate to build your lineups, automating 80% of the busy work it takes to be successful in MLB DFS. So you should be picking a small number of things that actually matter and doing those, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. Next, commit to the season. No one wins every night playing DFS, especially not in baseball. You will lose more nights than you win, and your EV, your expected value, is realized in the long term on one or two big nights over the course of the year. Now, I'm not saying this to scare you, but this is the reality. Your goal should be to play in a way where you can survive the swings of baseball DFS and realize that EV on those one or two big nights over the course of the season. This process I'm about to outline is not a daily money printer, but it is a blueprint for success over the course of the season. And because we have to make it through the season, it means managing your bankroll is important so that you can weather that variance and get to the end of the year. So opt into and commit to playing MLB DFS for the season and leverage your bankroll each night in a way that allows you to sustain that. You don't want to strike out. You should play within your means. And this is going to mean something different to everybody, but you should set and understand your unique bankroll. And a little gamble is fine here or there. I played a little extra for opening day because opening day is fun, but you should treat that more as an entertainment expense. If you're totally unsure what this means for you or where to start with bankroll management, I recommend playing about 2.5 to 5% of your bankroll per main slate. That is assuming that that bankroll is what you have for the season and you're not redepositing if you run out. Now, the next thing to get right with your MLB DFS process is to optimize your contest selection portfolio. There are dozens of contests in the lobby every single night. It can be hard to know exactly what you should be playing. There are a few principles to keep in mind here. The first is to play easy competition. The best players in DFS on both DraftKings and FanDuel are restricted from entering contests under $3. There's also restrictions for contests that are under $5 with less than a $25,000 prize pool. Why willingly choose to play up against the Dodgers every single night when you can be playing up against little leaguers? Easier opponents in your contest means that you are going to have a higher ROI over the long term. So your goal should be to enter these contests first. The very first place you choose to apply your bankroll when you're entering any contest for a given night should be the contest under $3 and then under $5 with less than a $25,000 total prize pool. Next, get more at-bats. No one hits a home run every single plate appearance, but the more at-bats you see, the more opportunities you have. This means playing more lineups. Now, focusing on contests that are under $3 first will help with this because you're just going to get more lineups in play for a certain dollar amount. But you should also be mixing in 20 and 150 max tournaments with single entries to make your money go as far as you can each slate. You'll often hear advice that you should be only playing single entry or 3 max tournaments. And while it's true that your expected ROI in those tournaments is likely to be higher, you're only getting 1 or 3 shots at it each time you play one of those contests. And don't get me wrong, single entry and 3 max are great contests to play, but if you're limiting your at-bats to just a handful of entries each slate, you're pushing out it longer and longer and longer before you're likely to realize your expected value. So let me put this into practice. I'm going to reserve my entries right now for tonight's slate on both DraftKings and FanDuel with the goal of getting about $250 down on DraftKings and say $150 down on FanDuel. So the way that I typically do this on DraftKings here is first just make sure that I've got the right slate selected and then selecting tournaments and guaranteed prize pools. And then I like to limit the entry fee first to the $5 and then sort it lowest to highest. Now I'm going to skip a lot of these satellites and the dime times that just get constantly reposted. But the first contest I'm actually going to enter here is the quarter jukebox. We'll just throw a dummy lineup in here. So we'll quickly just fill this out. This will be replaced very quickly when we actually build lineups here and get our entry in. Okay, now I can use the bulk enter tool to reserve. So I'll go ahead here again and set $5 and tournaments and look highest to lowest and turn bulk enter on. And I'm going to fill this out, getting 19 more entries into this quarter jukebox. It looks like there's another one that's been posted, so we'll go ahead and play that as well. Skipping a lot of these smaller contests and satellites, but we'll play this solo shot. We'll go ahead and enter this solo shot as well. Mixing in these 20 maxes along with the single entries that we're playing. We'll play both daily dollars, this strike 3. Okay, and now we get to the $3 range here. Before I just go in and max out this contest, which would be too much for what I want to play this slate anyway, I'm going to fill out some of these smaller single entries and 3 maxes. And then we'll play the chin music and the 5-tool player. Now, instead of playing this contest here, which is going to allow sharper players to enter it because it's at or above $3 and above a $250,000 prize pool, I'm going to keep scrolling down and see if I can find anything else that looks good. And I can't. There is typically a $4 contest for a 20 max, and I think I might have missed it for this slate. But that $4 20 max when it's under a $25,000 prize pool is a great one to play as well. I'm going to instead shove the rest of my entries into this mega mini max here. Probably want to get maybe about 30 entries into this. Maybe a little bit more than that. Let's do 40 and get up to, actually, let's go a little bit higher and get up to about that $250 range that I was looking for this slate. And then we'll click submit. Okay, let's bounce over to FanDuel now. We're going to do the same thing. The nice thing about FanDuel is we can just bulk enter right from the start here. So let's go ahead here and look at these entries. Now, again, I'm going to start by limiting this here and look at only the contests that are under $5 first. Okay, starting at the bottom here, we'll go ahead and get into both the 5 cent and the quarter, getting a 300 different unique entries in play here. We'll get into the $2 single entry, the $5 single entry, the $1 3 max, the $1 single entry, and we'll go ahead and play this contest as well. I'm at about $131, which is perfect. We'll go ahead and just reserve our entry and get entered onto FanDuel as well. Okay, now that we've got our entries reserved here, we've got an appropriate amount of bankroll for this particular slate entered, and we've entered as many entries as we can into the under $3 range. We've got a ton of lineups to play. We're in a good spot. Before we start building, the first thing we want to do is upload our entries file. So to do that, we'll click the Upload Entries button, download template file from DraftKings, and we'll just drag and drop that and pull that in over here. The nice thing about doing this ahead of time is it makes the process of getting our entries into our contests extremely easy, and it makes all of our contest sim settings. So SaberSim already knows what we need to do with our contest sims for the different contests we're playing. Now let's quickly repeat the same thing on FanDuel here. So I'm going to add a new slate. This time go over to FanDuel and find the main slate. And then in the contest tab, similar process, just one extra step on FanDuel. We'll click the Upload Entries button, download template from FanDuel, this time clicking the CSV edit button, and then download a CSV template. And we can upload that file, and we've got the same thing ready on FanDuel now. So let's start the process of actually building some lineups here. You want to consider SaberSim as your DFS co-pilot, and remember to keep things simple. It is a huge waste of time to set a bunch of settings up front. We'll have the opportunity to review our lineups after they are built and iterate and add any takes we have from there. But our sims are way more sophisticated than average projections and optimizers, so you should let them cook on the first build. You're going to get great stacks and smart fades automatically. Once you are more familiar with your MLB DFS process as the season progresses, it is fine to add in things if you notice that you are doing them every single time up front, but you should start small. The only thing we're going to have to do for DraftKings specifically is make a change to abide by DraftKings compliance rules. The easiest way to do this is to just uncheck a player. You can either pick somebody that you do know you want to intentionally fade, or what I often end up doing here is just scrolling down and finding some player that I know I'm not going to want at all, like maybe a relief pitcher or someone like that, and unchecking them from my build. Okay, and now we're ready to build, so let's hit build lineups. And while this is building, I want to emphasize what's going on behind the scenes here. We're leveraging our data from our play-by-play simulations of every game on the slate and building the best possible lineups for different ways that these baseball games may play out. We're going beyond just average projections here, looking at the full range of outcomes for each player on the slate and building high upside lineups, which we'll see in just a second. After your lineups are built, your contest sims should kick off automatically if you're on the SaberSim Ultimate plan. Contest sims are going to calculate the simulated ROI from simulations of every contest we're playing. Every single contest is different. If we go back to look at my contest file here, we've got a mix of some smaller field single entry and 3 max type tournaments and some larger field 150 max type tournaments. Because these contests are different, the size of them is different, the payout structure is different, what types of lineups your opponents play into these contests is different, the strategy needed to win is different, and these contest sims are going to pick up on that. Now, if you're not currently on the SaberSim Ultimate plan, we reset everyone's free trials to celebrate opening day. So I would recommend starting a free Ultimate trial for 5 days to test them. Makes a huge difference in the quality of lineups you'll get from SaberSim. Okay, now that our contest sims are complete and we're sorting by ROI, let's get these teams into our contest first. We'll have a second to go back and fine tune and review, but I always like to get an initial build into these contests first. Now, there are quite a few ways to customize the way that you end up filling your entries into your contests on SaberSim. For this video, I'm going to show you the simplest and most effective way to do it. First, go to autofill here, then make sure your fill method is unique rank, and then scroll over to the right. And I recommend typically sorting by entry fee. All you're saying there is that the contest that you're most invested into in the form of entry fee is going to get the best lineups entered into them first. Then you can click save to contests here. And what this is going to do is go down the list. It's going to find the best lineup by the chin music, the $5 single entries contest sim, and enter it into that contest. Then that lineup's not going to be used anywhere else. We'll go down and go to the 5-tool player, the $5 3 max. Put the best 3 lineups into that contest. Then find the best 50 by the mini maxes contest sim. So at each step of the way, you're getting the best possible lineup entered into each contest you are playing. Okay, now at this point, you are ready to review and revise the lineup portfolio you've ended up with. But at this point in the process, what you are getting is the best possible lineups from our simulations for each contest you played, which is exactly what you want to have. If you have no takes about the slate at all or don't really know ways that you would want to adjust any of your exposures, that's perfectly fine. You could be good to go right here entering these lineups for the slate. But if you want to spend some time reviewing, revising, or you have takes about the slate, this is where you should start to input. And my approach to do that is to go macro to micro, thinking about your lineups from the widest angle first, then getting more narrow. What I mean by that is starting with the lineup constructions, the actual stack types, then move to the hitting team stacks, and then look at individual player exposures. So let's start by looking at our stack types here, by looking at the stack exposure, and you can see what types of stacks we're getting in our entries here. And look at that. Right out of the gate, we're getting the types of stacks you want to play in MLB DFS. 5-2s, 5-3s, 5s, some 4-3s, some 4-4s. Big correlated stacks. Optimizers can't do this. This is part of the value of SaberSim. But this is also the first opportunity to maybe fine tune. Maybe you want to make sure you're particularly playing the largest stacks possible, or there's other stack types you don't really want to play. For me personally, I typically like to stick to the 5-2, 5-3s, 5s, and 4-4s, and 4-3s. So I'll check those stack types in here, and then we can do another save. Now this time, because we have this large pool of lineups that SaberSim has built, it's going to find a different set of lineups, the best possible lineup for each contest we're playing, while only giving us these stack types. Next up, I recommend looking at the team stacks and seeing what types of teams you're playing here. You can study the exposure column to see how much exposure you're getting to a particular team on the slate, and compare this with your opinions or research about the slate. Now, for me personally, one of the things I typically do here is try to make sure that my exposure to different stacks is somewhat flat. I don't typically like to have a ton of exposure to any particular team, especially not the Athletics with a 3.6 implied run total. I'm sure SaberSim thinks that that's a low-owned stack that gives you a lot of leverage on the slate, but 52% is a lot of exposure for me. So I might go down and maybe make an adjustment here. I'm not going to ignore the Sims completely. If SaberSim thinks this is a good leverage spot, I still think they're probably a good play, and I may still want them to be my top exposed team, but maybe I bring them down to 30% max exposure. From here, I can just hit another save, tell SaberSim, hey, give me a little bit less athletics exposure on this slate, and we'll see. There we go. Now we've got a different exposure here, where now Atlanta has become our highest exposed stack, and the athletics are still a leverage spot for us, but we've gotten quite a bit less exposure there. If there are teams you're not getting enough exposure to here, you can set minimum exposures or continue to fine tune and tweak your team stack exposures based on your individual research and takes on the slate. Once you're happy with your team stack exposure, you can bounce over to the player exposures, and I tend to mostly focus on pitchers here. I generally recommend thinking about hitters through the stacks rather than individual hitter exposures, but if you do have opinions on specific individual hitters, you can also spend some time looking at your hitting exposures here. And I take the same approach here. I like to see what my exposure looks like to the pitchers here by looking at the highest exposed pitchers, but also, and perhaps more importantly, the leverage column. This is where I spend a lot of my time looking at my pitchers. Leverage is going to show you your exposure minus the ownership projection here, giving you an idea of what your biggest stands are towards or against the field. In other words, the pitchers that you have that have the highest positive leverage are your biggest stands against the field, the guys you are rooting for the most. And the biggest negative leverage pitchers you have are your biggest fades. Now, again, you should combine this with your research. If there is a player you want to make a bigger stand or a bigger fade on, you want to make your leverage either more positive or more negative by adjusting the min and max exposure columns. And if there's a stand that you're taking or that the Sims recommend taking that you're unsure about, you want to get a closer to zero leverage. You want to get closer to ownership. Now, again, it's perfectly fine if you don't have any strong opinions here and you just look at this as an opportunity to review and know what you're sweating on that particular slate. And at a quick glance, there's not really anything jumping out to me personally here. I like the idea of getting over the field on a guy like Jack Flaherty because pitching does seem a little weak today. So if there are some leverage spots with some lower owned plays, I'm pretty happy with that. As an example, I might cap my exposure to a guy like Luis Castillo. Again, it does look like pitching is pretty flat today at the top end. And if he's going to be the chalky pick, that might be a player that maybe I want a little bit less exposure to. That does explain also why we were seeing that athletics leverage on the hitting stacks. SaberSim's picking up on that same angle. But let's adjust that exposure down and say that we don't want to be over the field on Luis Castillo here on a slate where it seems like pitching is pretty flat. The last thing I'll call out is if you've made a lot of changes to a bunch of different player exposures, you may see a message pop up at some point that says SaberSim can't reach your desired exposures. We've ran out of lineups in your lineup pool to fill all of your contests while listening to everything you want to do with those lineups. If that happens, that's totally fine. All you should do is click the Rebuild Lineups button up here in the upper left and then start a new build. This is going to rebuild a new pool of lineups for you, this time using the exposures you've set thus far as a foundation for that build. So if you're taking a bunch of big stands, maybe you've changed the pitcher exposures quite a bit, heavily restricted your stacks and your team stacks and things like that, we'll build a fresh pool with a new foundation for you to start this process again from. And you can think of this as an iterative approach. Even if you need multiple builds to dial in and fine tune your lineups the way you want to, you're still saving way more time than what it would have taken to put in all that information up front on a traditional optimizer. Plus, you're getting the valuable information from what the Sims think. Remember, SaberSim is your co-pilot here, and seeing what the Sims think about the right way to play at this slate is will open your eyes to maybe some potential fades or stands that you weren't even thinking of. But once you're happy with your lineups, now all we need to do is save one more time here to get the most up-to-date lineups into our contests. And then when we get the positive success message that that's complete here, we can download the entries file and get it uploaded to DraftKings. Now I want to walk through the same process quickly on FanDuel just so you can see what the process of saving and uploading looks like there. So once our build is complete and our contest sims have run, we can click Save to Contests. And then once we get the positive success message, we can download the entries file from FanDuel, only this time clicking CSV Edit and then uploading that file on FanDuel. Edit entries. This process here on FanDuel can take a second, so I'm going to skip this, but you just want to, oh, never mind. There, it's done. Okay, and now we're all entered for this slate. Now let's summarize the key principles that it takes for a successful MLB DFS season. First, keep it simple. Don't add unnecessary complexity to your process. I think people are sometimes surprised to hear that most of the coaches here at SaberSim have MLB DFS processes that really only take 10 or 15 minutes to build lineups every single night. Second, commit to the season. Understand that no one wins every single night. Your expected value is realized in the long term. So don't go broke. Play a reasonable amount of bankroll each slate, probably around 2.5 to 5% if you're otherwise not really sure how much to play, and set reasonable mental expectations of what you're expecting to do each night. And then optimize your contest selection portfolio. Play the easiest competition as possible and get as many at bats as you can for what you're playing for that particular slate. When you're actually building your lineups, keep your lineup building process simple with the build, review, revise process I outlined here. Let the Sims automate the busy works. You can iterate on your takes as you're going through, looking at your stack exposures, your team stacks, and your individual player exposures, and rebuild additional builds if you need to, but don't spend unnecessary time putting in a bunch of rules up front. Now, in the next video, we'll walk through quick swap and late swap for a live slate in real time, showing you how to update for confirmed starting lineups, breaking news, and things like that. And then in the following video, I'll explain how to use our contest flashback to check your work and make sure that you're on the right track with your MLB DFS play. And if you have questions about your MLB DFS process, take advantage of our daily office hours live streams and our Discord server, where you can ask questions to SaberSim coaches and other players in our community. In the meantime, thanks for watching and good luck this season.